I'm gonna do a little game with you. God, I hope I haven't done this with you before. I'm pretty sure I haven't. It's just basically best and worst. So I'm gonna give you like a bit of a sentence, and you just say the best of that subject and the worst of that subject, an explanation why. And
Okay.
hey, if there's a story in it, so be it. First one
Gotcha.
is the best and worst giants of wrestling apart from Andre.
The best and worst. I think Kurgan, I think got was in a tough position. I think Paul White was in a tough position, right? Because anybody coming in as a giant after Andre, those are literally big boots to fill.
Mm.
But I think he did well with it. I think early on when he was trying to do a little bit more than a giant should, then he found his footing, and I think got it. And then when he slimmed back down, got it. I think in our business, because of Andre, and again, left just this massive legacy as a giant. And anybody that ever saw him realized that he truly was a giant. Uh, to go out there, as like I'm thinking, like trying to look through Paul White's eyes. He comes in and figures like, I was more athletic than say Bruno was, but Bruno drew a gazillion times
Mm.
more money. The same thing coming in and say, well, I can do more than Andre, but do you need to do more than Andre? So it's sort of like one of those things that's so ill-defined. It's sort of murky as to what is a giant supposed to do in the ring. I don't think the fans want to see giants doing flying head scissors and things. But Paul, I think, did an amazing job with it. Considering that he was like one of those guys that came after that and went a little bit off kilter from what Andre did. To be fair, Andre did a lot more when he was younger. But I think Paul did it probably as well as you could do it to fill those shoes. Kurgan, I think then it became sort of anybody that's over a certain height or has a certain look, or and Kurgan's got that just impactful face and that strange looking body. El Gigante, another, right? Just to throw a big guy out there. Clearly, those two examples show that it's not just somebody's big. They have to be, big and be able to do something in the ring. And even though Andre, towards the end of his career, was a lot more crippled up than he had been, I remember matches, getting, backdropped and him throwing drop kicks and things. So, he was pretty adept when he was younger. And again, just so large that it took your breath away when you saw him. Again, not an easy role to come in because it's already been done pretty much to perfection. It's just not finding a 7 foot or 7'3", 4" guy, a guy that's bigger, a guy that has a push. It's a guy that can come in and mesmerize. And Andre had, luckily for him, there had not been a giant before him. So suddenly he's got this, tabula rasa to create what he wanted it to be and left the template. So I think Paul did about as good a job as you could do in filling those shoes.
Yeah, I mean, there were like tall guys and everything, like your Don Leo Jonathans, who, for example,
Yes.
who was a giant at the time, but obviously with the
Big John
acromegaly and everything
Studd.
else, Big John Studd as well.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first proper conversation you had with Andre?
Yes. I had met him in 1981. I wasn't even training yet. Dominic called me and we had become friends by that. Well, I say we became friends. I probably became like a dingleberry. Like, hey, Dominic, you want to do something? And he called me and said he had a show in Steubenville, which is probably 50, 60 miles from home. Do you want to go? So Andre and these guys, I said, oh, yeah, I'll go hang out with Dominic and go to a wrestling show and not pay. Hell yeah, I'll go. And the first person I was talking to was Blacktop Bully. As we walked in the back, it was just a regular like gymnasium locker room. And Nick Busick came over, and we were friends to the day he died. And as we're talking with him, Dominic goes, "Here comes Andre now." So I turned my head, and Andre's head is like this above the lockers. The top of the lockers are here. And I, honest to God, thought he's walking on the bench. He can't be that tall, right? And then he turns at the end, and his feet are on the floor. And I know my mouth went like I was probably $195 at the time, and didn't look anything like I would when I broke into the business. When I was probably 14, 15, 16 at that point, maybe 17. When I first went to WWF in 1990, Dominic said, first thing you do first night, get dressed, go introduce yourself to Andre. And I did exactly what Dominic told me. I got dressed, went down, pounded on the door, knocked on the door. I opened the door, and I can see it right now in my mind's eye. He's sitting on the bench, but because his butt is so big, he's got like half of one butt cheek, and he's got the other leg pushed out, like pushing himself onto the bench. and he's playing cribbage. And they, little pegs, his fingers are like this big around, he's holding these pegs. But what I noticed is he had a bottle of wine. Now you'd think that John would just pick the bottle up and take a swig, right? I mean, the bottle like, looked like this in his hands, like a little tiny thing. But he had a little wine glass, it looked like a thimble in his hands. And he'd pour a little splash of wine in, and he'd pick it up and he'd drink it and put it down. But what really threw me was when I walked in, he looked at me and he went, Dominic Danucci. I thought Dominic had called him and said, hey, my kid's going to come say hello to you, and I asked Dominic later, I said, nice rib, like tell him I'm coming, that kind of thing. I was the kid that was with him in 81. He goes, I didn't call Andre. That Andre remembered me not almost 10 years later. Didn't look anything like I looked 10 years earlier. That he remembered me. I think it underscored what a friendship and what a camaraderie he and Dominic had. And the last time Dominic saw him, they were both flying home. Dominic to Italy to see his parents and him to France. And he made Dominic fly through France with them. And he kept Dominic for a day. They played cards. And finally, Dominic said, I got to go. And he said that was the last time he saw him. Those guys like Dominic, that whole generation, Billy, Dominic, Bruno, Andre, Pat Patterson, Gorilla Monsoon, all those guys were like this, and they all had run the roads together. And I think that's just a little side note on this, is that these were the stories that I had heard coming into the business. And so I expected when I broke into the business, this is what I was going to see, this camaraderie and these friendships. And instead, what I saw was politics, backstabbing. And for the first couple of years in the business, it was so off-putting to me because it was nothing like the stories I'd heard. And it, in a strange sort of way, it thickened my skin. You came in, I thought if you smiled at me and said, hello, you're my buddy, right? And boy, did I get stabbed in the back so many times. And finally, I think when you hear people say like, oh, Shane's an asshole, I can be an asshole. I'm a pretty good asshole if I want to be. But typically it's because I treat people like they treat me. And because I would give it back, I think that was where it became like, oh, you're not allowed to do that. I can call you whatever I want and say whatever, do whatever I want with you, but you can't say anything back. I said, hell with that. I didn't need the wrestling business. I could have gone and done a million other things, like medical school, like teaching, going to work in government. So I wasn't betrothed to wrestling. I loved it, but I wasn't stuck in it. And that served me well over my career. It gave me enough of the buffer that they couldn't just continuously screw with me.